Hi guys, I hope everybody's doing good today. It's beautiful outside. Hope you've been playing outside a lot. It's been pretty crazy over here. We've been to the park at Abraham Lincoln for a while. That was pretty fun. But now the kids are watching a movie and they didn't want to sit and listen to me read the story to them, so they'll watch it just like you are. But I miss you guys so much. Today we're doing chapter 2 of Mrs. Piggle, the Won't Pick Up Toys Cure. I know none of you have this problem, right? You all pick up your toys every time your parents ask? I bet you do. All right, here we go. Hubert was a very lucky little boy whose grandfather always sent him wonderful toys for Christmas. Hubert's mother said that his grandfather sent him these marvelous presents because Hubert was such a dear little boy. His father said that it was to make up for the awful name they had wished on him. Hubert was named for his grandfather. His full name was Hubert Egbert Prentice. Hubert liked the presents his grandfather sent him, but who wouldn't? He had an electric train with track that went 4 times around his bedroom and into the closet and out again, and even had 7 stations, and every signal there was 2 bridges and a snow shed. He also had a little builder set so large that he could build regular office buildings, and a great big wagon full of stone blocks made into shapes so that he could build big stone bridges for his electric train, and stone buildings, and even stone barracks for his 1,500 toy soldiers. Hubert also had a circus with every kind of wooden jointed animal, and clowns and tightrope walkers and trapeze artists. He had a little typewriter and a real desk and a little radio and 2 automobiles. He had about 100 or more airplanes and little cars. He had a fire engine with real sirens and lights and hooks and ladders, and so many books that he had to have 2 bookcases in his room. Hubert liked all of his toys, and he was moderately generous about letting other children play with them. But he never put his things away. When his mother made his bed, she had to pick her way around, and in and out and over the electric train and track. She had to take circus performers off the bureau and the bedposts. She had to pick up books that had been thrown face down on the floor, and she was continually gathering up the little builder set. It used to take her about 3 hours to do Hubert's room, and about 1 hour to do the rest of her housework. Why was his mother cleaning up his room? Shouldn't he do that himself? What? You better clean up your own room. She would send Hubert up to put his toys away, but all he ever did was stuff them under the bed or into the closet. And in the morning, when his mother cleaned his room, they were there, ready for her to pick up. Mrs. Prentice was getting a little bored with this. One rainy Saturday, Hubert invited all of his little friends to play up in his room. He had Dickie and Charlie and Billy and Tommy and Bobby. They got out every single toy that Hubert owned and played with them. And then, just before dinner, they all went home and left the mess. Hubert's mother didn't know a thing about this until the next morning when she went in to make Hubert's bed. Then she just stood in the doorway and looked. The electric train track went under the bed 5 times, and under the bureau, and under the chairs, and around the desk, and into the closet. All along the track were bridges and buildings of the stone blocks, and whole towns built from the little builder set. On the bed, and under the bed, and on the bureau were the circus tent, the animals, the clowns, the tightrope walkers, and the trapeze artists. The floor was littered with books and little automobiles and airplanes and painting sets and chemical sets and wood-burning sets and crayons and coloring books and the little typewriter and the printing set and teddy bears and balls and jacks and parcheesi games and jigsaw puzzles and soldiers and soldiers and soldiers. Sounds like our classroom after discovery time. Perspiration broke out on Hubert's mother's forehead, and she began to feel faint. So she closed the door and slowly went downstairs. She took 2 aspirin tablets and then telephoned her friend, Mrs. Baggs. She said, "Hello, Mrs. Baggs. This is Hubert's mother, and I am so disappointed in Hubert. He has such lovely toys. His grandfather sends them to him every Christmas, you know, but he does not take care of them at all. He just leaves them all over his room for me to pick up every morning." "Well," Mrs. Baggs said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Prentice, but I can't help you because, you see, I think it's too late." "Why, it's only 9:30, said Hubert's mother. "Oh, no, I mean too late in life," said Miss Baggs. "You see, We started Ermintrude picking up her toys when she was 6 months old. A place for everything and everything in its place. We have always told Ermintrude. Now, she is so neat that she becomes hysterical if she sees a crumb on the floor. Oh, well, I certainly hope she never sees Hubert's room, said Mrs. Prentice dryly. She'd probably have a fit. And then she hung up the phone. And then she called Mrs. Moohead. Good morning, Mrs. Moohead, she said. Does Gregory pick up his toys? Well, no, he doesn't, said Mrs. Moohead. But, you know, Gregory is rather delicate, and I feel that just playing with his toys tires him so much that I personally see that all of his friends put the toys away before they go home. Oh, that's a splendid idea, said Hubert's mother. But I am trying to train Hubert, not his playmates. Oh, well, of course, Hubert is very strong and healthy, but Gregory is intelligent, said Mrs. Moohead. Is he? Said Mrs. Prentice crossly, because she resented this inference that her son was all brawn and no brain. Oh, dear, squealed Mrs. Moohead. I think Gregory is running a temperature. I must go to him. She hung up the phone. Mrs. Prentice then called Mrs. Grapple. Hello, Marge. How's Susan? Mrs. Grapple said, I've spanked her 7 times since breakfast, and I just heard a crash, so she's probably getting ready for another. How's Hubert? Oh, that's what I called about, said Miss Prentice. Can you suggest a way to make Hubert want to pick up his toys? His room looks like a toy store after an earthquake. Well, why don't you just call Mrs. Piggle? I've heard she's perfectly wonderful. All the children in town adore her, and she has a cure for everything. As soon as I spank Susan, I'm going to call her. Hubert's mother said, Thank you very much, Marge. That's just what I'll do. I had forgotten about Mrs. Piggle, but I just know she can help me. So she called Mrs. Piggle and said, Mrs. Piggle, I hate to bother you, but you seem always to know what to do about children, and I'll confess that I don't know what to do to make Hubert put his toys away. Mrs. Piggle said, Hubert is the sweet little boy with all the wonderful toys his grandfather sent him, right? Mrs. Prentice said, Why, yes, but I didn't know that you knew him. Oh, yes, said Mrs. Piggle. Hubert and I are old friends. In fact, he's building an automobile in my backyard out of orange crates and empty tomato cans. Hubert is a very good carpenter. Hubert's mother thought of the 2 little automobiles with rubber tires, real horns, leather seats big enough for 2 boys, and lights that turned on with a switch that Hubert's grandfather had given him. And she wondered why in the world he would want to build an automobile out of 2 old orange crates and tomato cans. She said, however, So that's where he and Dickie go every afternoon. Well, I certainly hope he behaves himself. Oh, he does, said Mrs. Piggle. We're all very fond of Hubert. But this problem with his toys, let me see. Mrs. Piggle was quiet for some time. And then she said, I think the best thing for you to use is my old-fashioned won't pick up toys cure. Starting now, don't pick up any of Hubert's toys. Don't make his bed. In fact, do not go into his room. And when his room becomes so messy that he can't even get out of it, call me. Mrs. Piggle said goodbye and hung up the phone. Hubert's mother, looking very relieved, went gaily about her housework, baked a chocolate cake for dinner, and did not say a word to Hubert when he came home with 10 little boys, and they all trailed upstairs to play in Hubert's room. The next morning, when Hubert came downstairs for breakfast, his mother noticed that he had a little pan of watercolor paint stuck in his hair, and his shirt had purple ink from the printing set on one shoulder. She said nothing, but tripped upstairs after breakfast and quickly shut the door of his room. The next morning, Hubert's mother had a little trouble shutting the door of his room, and she noticed that Hubert had circles under his eyes, as though he had not slept very well. The next morning, Hubert was very late coming downstairs, and before he opened his door, his mother heard a great clatter and scraping as though he were moving furniture. He had little builder bolts stuck to his sweater and 2 paint pins in his hair. He was so sleepy he could barely keep his eyes open, and he had a red mark on one cheek. His mother looked at it closely and saw that it was the shape and size of one of his stone blocks. He must have slept with his head on one of the bridges. On the 7th day, after Hubert's mother stopped putting away his toys, he didn't come down to breakfast at all. And about 11 o'clock, his mother became worried and called Mrs. Piggle. She said, Good morning, Mrs. Piggle. This is the 7th day of the old-fashioned won't pick up toys cure, and I'm worried. Hubert has not come downstairs at all this morning. Mrs. Piggle said, Let me see. The 7th day. It usually takes 10 days, but Hubert has so many toys he would naturally be quicker. Quicker at what? Asked Hubert's mother anxiously. Quicker at getting trapped in his room, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. You see, the reason Hubert hasn't come downstairs is that he cannot get out of his room. Have you noticed anything different about him lately? Well, said Hubert's mother, he looks as though he hasn't been sleeping well, and on the 4th morning he had a red blotch on his cheek, the shape of one of his stone blocks. Said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. He probably can't get at his bed and is sleeping with his head on a block for a pillow. But what will I do? Asked Hubert's mother. How will I feed him? Just wait until he calls for food and then tell him to open the window, and you put a piece of rather dry bread and peanut butter on the garden rake. He'll have to drink out of the hose. Tie it to the rake and poke it up to him. When Hubert's mother hung up the telephone, she heard a muffled shout coming from the direction of Hubert's room. She hurried upstairs and listened outside the door. Hubert was shouting, Mother, I'm hungry. His mother said, Go over and open the window, dear. I'll send you up something on the rake. Mrs. Prentice took the crusty piece of a very old loaf of bread, spread some peanut butter on it, and took it around to the side of the house. Pretty soon, Hubert's window was raised about a foot, and a hand and arm appeared. His mother stuck the bread on one of the tines of the rake and poked it up at the window. The hand groped around for a while and then found the bread and jerked it off, and the window banged shut. That night, when Hubert's father came home, his mother told him all about Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's treatment. Hubert's father said, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle sounds all right, but none of this would have happened if Hubert's grandfather hadn't given him so many toys. When I was a boy, all I needed to have a good time was a little piece of string and a stick. Mrs. Prentice said, Not that old string and stick routine again, John. Anyways, now that Hubert has the toys, the picture has changed. Mr. Prentice hid his face behind the evening paper and said, Something smells delicious. Is it Irish stew, I hope? Yes, dear, said Hubert's mother, worrying about how she was going to serve Irish stew to Hubert on a rake. She finally put a potato on one prong, a carrot on another, and an onion on another, and pieces of meat on the last 3. The window was open only about 3 inches, but the hand grabbed the food. After dinner, Hubert's father tied the hose to the rake and held it up while Hubert put his mouth to the window opening and tried to get a drink of water. It was not very successful, but he managed to get a few drops. Mrs. Prentice was worried. The next morning she knocked on Hubert's door and said, Hubert, what are you still doing in here? Hubert said, I've got a bear pen made out of a bureau drawer, and my bed's the mother bear's house, and my train runs under my bed 13 times now. Hubert, dear, don't you think you should try and come out soon? Asked his mother. Hubert said, I don't want to come out. I like it in here. All my toys are out, and I can play with them any old time I wanna. This is fun. His mother went downstairs and called Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, Oh, but he will want to come out. Wait and see. That afternoon, about 2 o'clock, there was music on the street, and children's voices laughing and calling, and pretty soon, right past Hubert's house, marched Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and all the children, and right behind them came a circus parade. Hubert managed, by putting one foot in the bureau drawer and the other in a freight car of his train, to get up to the window and look out. He waved to Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and called, Hurry, hurry, and Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle called, Hurry, hurry, Hubert, we're going to march all over town, and then we're going to the circus. Hubert turned around quickly with the idea of getting to the door and joining the fun, but the freight car went scooting under the bed, and the bureau drawer tipped over and hit him smartly on the shins. Hubert began to cry and try and kick his way out the door, but everything he kicked seemed to hit back. He kicked a building, and a big block fell on his toe. He kicked a little builder office building, and it fell over and clouded him on the back of the head. He kicked a book, and it hit a lamp, which fell and knocked a heavy wooden elephant off the bedpost onto Hubert's shoulder. He could hear the music of the circus parade growing fainter and fainter, so he bawled louder and louder. And then he heard a tapping at his window. He crawled over and reached out. It was the rake with a note on it. He took the note and opened it. It said, The only way you can get out of that trap is to put everything back where it belongs, and if you hurry, we will wait for you. Your friend, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Hubert began by finding the little builder box. He took down an office building and put each piece in its right place. Then he put away the stone blocks, then the train tracks, the circus, the soldiers, the paints, the chemical set, the printing press, the books, the fire engines, the automobiles. He played little games, pretending that he was racing someone to see who could find the most parts of a game the quickest. He had to take off the bedclothes and shake them in order to find the soldiers and the circus, and then he thought that as long as the bedclothes were off anyways, he might as well make his bed. It was so lumpy when he finished, he thought he had left some airplanes in it, and took the covers off again and shook them. He made the bed again, and this time it was neat and smooth. Hubert was proud. He was under the desk finding the last piece of the little builder when he heard the music again. He put the piece in the box and put the box in the closet and tore down the stairs and out the front door. And there they came, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, all the children, and the circus. Hubert ran out to meet them, and nobody said anything about the pan of orange paint stuck in his hair, or the word XYPGUN printed on his cheek in purple ink. Anyways, they went down the street, Hubert carrying the flag and yelling the loudest. The end of chapter 2. I'll see you guys tomorrow for chapter 3.